If you do want to type your question into the chat so you don't forget it, feel free to do that. But we will be pausing it, and we will be asking for questions and any feedback. So we'll start. We're starting the recording now. Thank you very much, Sofia, for being here.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Diana. And it's a pleasure to be here. And thank you for joining us today. So we will go right in. Thank you again, Diana, for the introduction. My name is Sofia Cervantes, and I'm with the State Council on Developmental Disabilities. We are a state advocacy agency, and our agency was instituted by federal law and put us in the role of providing advocacy support to individuals with developmental disabilities and their families, and to bring about systemic change. And so part of our role is, one, to be able to answer questions. It's called technical assistance. We provide technical assistance, which is state fancy talk for feel free to give us a call and we can answer questions. Out of those questions and the frequency that we get certain questions, we create trainings. And so we create trainings such as the one we're going to be having today to be able to address the questions that multiple people have about the same topic. And then our other role is, again, to work on systemic change. So changing the laws, the policies that impact individuals with developmental and or intellectual disabilities. And so please feel free to keep us as a resource if you have questions on anything related to disability. You went to an IEP and you came out a little lost and have questions, feel free to give us a call. If you have questions about regional center, IHSS, SSI, anything with your insurance related to disability, anything disability related, feel free to give us a call. And I am putting my information on the chat. Thought I could multitask, but turns out a little less than I thought. So here's the information on the chat. Also, for today's presentation, which will be on sexuality and disability, we are putting a link on the chat where you will have access to the presentation and other materials. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you can have an idea what will pop up on your screen. So when you press the link that's on your chat, it will take you to a Google Drive. And this Google Drive includes the presentation. So if you click on PowerPoint, Sexuality and Disability, it will open up the presentation that I will launch on your screen in just a few minutes. And it will also give you a few other resources that might be helpful for you. Here, under announcements, you'll see a few announcements for our office and State Council. Before we get started with our training on sexuality, I did want to mention that our office holds trainings every Monday at 10 a.m. And if your children are still school age, then this might be of interest to you. We are beginning, or we're continuing our trainings, but in a series for special education topics. So the next one that we have in English would be on the 17th, which is Monday, the 17th, on understanding evaluations. And then the following training in English would be on the 31st with state compliance complaints, both topics related to special education. The Zoom information remains the same for all the trainings. So please feel free to either screenshot this or have this available to you so that you could join us if the topics are of interest to you. Okay, and again, all this you'll have through that link that is in the chat. All right. So in a second here, I will launch our presentation here on the screen. And on this first page, you'll see my information and our office number. So again, please do feel free to connect with us if you have questions here. We can address them or thereafter. So feel free to contact us outside of this time. All right. So this is an important topic, one that sometimes we don't discuss as much. So I am glad that we get to discuss this topic, even just as an introduction and as making a point of the fact that this topic may need to be more frequently addressed with our children or our teenagers or adults. And so this is a conversation, and being that we want to make it a conversation, please do feel free to post questions or comments on the chat. Please also feel free to raise your real hand or virtual hand in order to get into this topic. There will be sections where I will engage your participation if you would like to participate and sort of give us a little bit of your experience, and we will make it a point to pause the recording during those times. Okay, so please feel free to engage. If you're available on camera, please feel free to join us. It's always better to have a conversation with a few faces, so feel free to come on. If you cannot, no problem as well. And so let's dive into this topic. So sexuality and disability. So this topic, I would say that even with disabilities aside, is sometimes a topic that might be a little bit difficult or uncomfortable to go into. Right? I sometimes hear couples fight about who's going to talk about what, right? Well, he's a boy, so you talk to him. I'm not going to talk about that topic, right? And so sometimes it's a topic that parents or even professionals may feel not knowing how to address. And so again, we hope that your comfort and just awareness of this topic is more after this presentation. And so when we talk about sexuality, one of the first things that I'd like to mention is I really appreciate going to a conference several years ago, actually, where they talked about sexuality, sex and sexuality as an energy. And they made it a point to express how in a typical developing adult, we release sexual energy in different ways, including in ways that don't appear sexual. And so this person discussed the fact that if sexuality and this sexual energy is indeed an energy, many of us release this throughout our day in different ways. Again, including ways that do not appear sexual, like road rage, right? Like starting an argument with someone, or like whatever feelings arise when you receive a text from a significant other, or something sweet that someone said, or you're walking down the street and someone compliments the way you look, right? And so it is said that this energy is released in different ways. However, for some individuals, and probably we could say most individuals with disabilities, there is a limited opportunity. They have less opportunities to release this type of energy, even just given by the limit in their social contacts or their environment. A lot of the individuals that have disabilities either have someone supporting them continuously throughout the day, and so they have little space to even be alone. And also, individuals with disabilities may also have a smaller to, unfortunately, non-existent social circle. And so these possibilities for exchanging your number with someone, or giving them your Instagram, that's the thing now, right? Or giving them your Facebook account and messaging, and these opportunities that individuals have seem to be at a lesser amount when someone has a disability. And so what we see sometimes is that this energy, including this sexual energy, sometimes does not have an opportunity to be explored, expressed, or released in any way. And so even in having the choice of what am I going to wear this morning, right? Perhaps you woke up, if you would, right, a little flirty this morning, a little bit, you want to kind of have a different style today. You want to add a little bit more makeup or decor to yourself, right? We all make those choices. And in this concept, we're saying part of releasing sexual energy includes some of these simple actions that you and I may have the opportunity to make a choice about every single morning. However, again, with individuals with disabilities, we would say that even in this area of choosing clothes, of choosing styles, of choosing decor, even that at times is decreased for a person that has a disability, especially if that person requires a lot of support. Right. I remember working with a young lady. Well, I call her young lady. We actually are the same age. So there you go. I guess I'm calling myself that I'm a young lady. So we were the same age. And when I began working with her, she was actually the first individual that I worked with that was my same age. Previously, I had worked with children and teenagers. And so this was an interesting and different dynamic for me as I supported her, being that I respected her. I was her therapist, but I respected her as my peer, right? We're the same age. And this individual, this woman, she communicated through typing. So through alternative methods of communication. And her method was facilitated communication, which was typing, and sometimes she needed physical support. And so there were a few mornings where she kind of appeared a little different, kind of frustrated. She would kind of keep touching her hair and her clothing. And I said, hey, are you comfortable in your clothes? And she prompted to get support to communicate. And, she said no. And then she initiated to type some more and communicate some more. And she said, I've never wore jeans. And I said, okay, I said, do you want to wear jeans? Yeah, actually, you're right. You usually wear tights with kind of like a oversized shirt, and that's a cool style. But do you like that style? Let's talk more about what you would want. Long story short, that turned into a whole goal area for this young woman. Right. This young woman began shopping for herself, began asking, she had limited communication. So she said, Sophie, hair, eyelash is what she communicated. And sometimes it was repetitive. And so we would refer to her typing and she would complete her thought and say, I want my hair straight like yours. Right. Verbally, she would communicate some words, but through typing, she was able to elaborate on her thoughts. And so little by little, we began working on her doing different styles of hair, being able to wear makeup because that's what she wanted to explore, curling her eyelashes, et cetera, et cetera. This woman turned into a completely different girl at the end of certain months. She now was being viewed a little bit different. She felt different. All this to say, part of that dressing up, part of that identity formation for her was a sense of releasing certain sexual energy for her, we could say, right? And so returning to this thought that sexuality is an energy, then we might ask ourselves, how is it that we each release it? And what opportunities do our children or teens or adults have to release it when there is also the accompaniment of a disability? Considering that, again, their intellectual ability may range, their communication skill may range, their opportunity for social interaction ranges, their independence and their environment ranges. And so with that, what opportunities are they left with to express, to explore, and to release this sexual energy, right? And I like the concept of referring to sexuality as an energy because sometimes perhaps when you and I think about sexuality or sex, we have a whole connotation of what that means, right? We either have a prior experience or prior examples of what that sexual energy looks like. Whereas for some individuals with disabilities, that topic of sexuality is not very developed and their awareness may be very limited, but still remains the fact that it is an energy to explore and release. And so I wonder, and do feel free, we may pause in just a few if there's any hands that want to contribute. I wonder, how might you see this energy manifested in your son or daughter? Even if it doesn't look sexual in nature, do you sometimes wonder if some of their behavior or interactions have to do because of this sexual energy and even sexual curiosity? So I myself am curious, right? Would you say that you're seeing some of this sexual energy manifest in different ways in your son or daughter? And what is it that you see? And again, feel free to come on camera and show me your hand or raise your virtual hand. if there's anyone that would be open to sharing. So thank you for sharing those thoughts. And yes, so sometimes we see sexual energy manifested actually through behavior, such as them appearing more irritable, agitated. In my humble experience, prior to being a advocate, I worked individually with individuals with specifically autism and a co-occurring mental health diagnosis, so autism with anxiety or bipolar or schizophrenia. And most of the individuals I worked with had limited verbal communication or were nonverbal. And in my humble observation, just of the families that I had the opportunity to work with, it did appear that during this transition into puberty, there was an escalation of aggression for those individuals that appeared to not know what was going on with their body or how to respond to it, right? And so what we note and what we know is that puberty is that time of change that could introduce a lot of frustration, especially if there are a lot of unknowns, right? So it is said that puberty in girls begins between the ages of 9 and it may go through 16, right? Depending on their own development. And for boys, it's from 10 years old usually to 18. And so for the person who commented earlier, they may still be within that range, or their range may be a little different, right? And so being that our children are experiencing changes during this puberty time, 9 through 18 for both girls and boys, if we created a bracket for them, 9 through 18, then one might say this is a very crucial time of change. And just like we learn, if your children have ever been in ABA, right, there's a term priming, where priming is you prepare the individual for an event that is coming or for a change that is coming. And so sometimes when we talk about physical changes, we forget that they may need that priming just as they need priming for other changes and activities. So sometimes it's beneficial, even if we believe that our children have not quite entered that stage of physical change and hormonal change, that it may be important to provide that information, have those conversations in a priming way, meaning before they even show signs that they are experiencing something, right? And the reason I say that is, again, in most of my experience was with individuals with autism, and this is kind of across some diagnoses though, so it's not focused on autism. The fact that a lot of individuals have difficulty with change, right? Now, imagine much more if that change includes change in their own body, like the appearance of hair where there was no hair before, right? For girls, when they begin their menstrual period, what a scary event it could be, or it has been for some of us who perhaps did not have the talk with our parents or our caretakers, and we found ourselves experiencing our period having no context, having no foreshadow of what was to come and what to even do with ourselves when that occurred. And so much more we could say with some individuals with disabilities who sort of struggle with this phase of change, it's important to have these conversations, right? Again, the appearance of hair, what changes during puberty, skin texture, sweat glands, right? Body hair, height, facial structure, voice, development of body parts, body functions, hormones, emotions, communication, the concept of identity sort of may kick in more strongly during puberty, and attraction, right? So all of these things change, and without any priming, these changes can be very alarming. And just to share a few, excuse me, I worked with an individual who was verbal, but when he heard his voice change and to what to him seemed from night to morning, he became nonverbal for a moment in time because his own voice scared him. Right. And so he would hear his voice and it wasn't sounding the way that it usually did. And it was deeper. And he described that it kind of just hurt, that it felt different. And during that same time, he also was noticing body hair and it truly freaked him out. Right. And so this individual struggled with that. And so sometimes it's hard to even predict when it's going to happen. But point here to make is the importance of, again, discussing this topic or the changes that may occur even before they occur. Keeping in mind that, and I'm going to backtrack just a little bit to the previous slide, that sexuality is a part of everyone's development. And just like we learn the function of each of our body parts, how to walk, how to use our legs, how to use our hands, how to use our voice and our eyes, and how to smell and touch, just like we usually at a young age begin to learn what each of our what each of the function of our body parts is, then it so may be important to also teach the function of our reproductive parts, right? And how our body changes and how our body experiences or may experience certain sensations and what to do when those come, right? And so this conversation in essence too is almost to demystify, right, this topic of sexuality. That when we talk about our reproductive parts, again, if you and I have a context that takes us to thinking about sex and our own sexual experiences, that's what may make us shy away from the topic without sometimes recognizing this topic of change and sex has no context currently for a lot of the individuals or your sons or daughters, right? And so how may we approach this topic without our own connotation? Here I'd like to mention that sometimes, again, our own previous experiences with sex and sexuality is what shies us away from discussing this with our children. If you have a history of abuse or even rape, right, depending on the history and the relationship that you've had with your own sexuality and sex, that might be a first step for you to get comfortable to speak to your own children about it. Because what occurs is sometimes we impose our own feelings about sex and our own experiences about sex to our children. And so our tone and our facial expression kind of comes with this connotation and this experience that we bring to the table, versus just discussing it almost in a medical sense, with no connotation attached, no prejudgment attached, right? Just as I am giving you information on changes that your body will experience, I want to make sure that you don't have any questions. And if you do, that you know that I'm an open space for those questions. And even adding to that introduction, the fact that I may not have all the answers to your questions, but maybe we can look that up. We can navigate that and research that together. Is sometimes the first step to being able to have an open conversation with our children. Sometimes we're not sure what they know or not know. Sometimes we're not sure how much to share based on their awareness, right? And so when we talk about sexuality, it also doesn't always have to be, we're going to have a talk and it's going to be from A through Z, right? I think sometimes that's why we may shy away from the conversation, because we say, oh, I'm not ready to talk about all of that, right? But sometimes it just starts with opening the topic and opening the door for questions. So one, you might ask and wonder, what changes have you noticed in your son or daughter? And what reactions have they had to their own changes, right? Whether your child is verbal, limited communication, or nonverbal, we all communicate, right? And so even if we are not able to express a full question, you might notice that your son or your daughter is kind of touching their reproductive parts more, maybe looking at, looking down and looking at their breasts, or looking at someone else's breasts, or when young boys become aware of breasts and what that may, what questions that may cause. Any of that, whenever you see that, that may be an indication clearly my son or daughter has questions. They may not know what questions they have. They may not know what they don't know, right? But it obviously seems that they have some curiosity, right? And again, keeping in mind, when our sons or daughters are nonverbal, sometimes we become nonverbal, especially about the hard topics. And so, especially if our children are nonverbal, it's to perhaps take that extra step of exploring and presenting information and providing space for them to ask questions. So when we look at discussing sexuality, sex and sexuality, it's important that we take it a step at a time, right? Step by step. And again, for you and I, when the topic of sex comes up, you may already think, oh my gosh, we're going to talk about intercourse, right? And the truth is, the first step to the conversation about sex may not even be intercourse, right? It may just first be their questions about their own body. Keeping in mind that this conversation, beyond the social aspect of it, beyond the fact that sexual behavior is part of social interaction, irregardless of how you manage your sexual energy, whether you think that having sexual relations is something that is a good choice, whether you believe that abstinence is the best choice, whatever we choose to do with our sexual energy, the fact is it exists, right? And so having a conversation about it, one, serves as a social aspect, but also, more so probably in this day and time, is for abuse prevention and for sex trafficking prevention, right? Unfortunately, the numbers or the instances of sex trafficking continues to increase. And so even if we would want to guard maybe our children from this topic, or think, oh, they don't need to know, right? We can still not talk about it. For the sake of abuse prevention and prevention of sex trafficking, this topic becomes very important. If they don't know the function of their body parts and the privacy of some of their body parts, then they may not know or recognize when someone is taking advantage of them, and they may not be able to discriminate between appropriate touch and inappropriate touch, right? And so while sex and sexuality has a social component to it, it also really has a health and safety component to it. Because again, the more you know about your body, the more that you know how others should treat or view your body, the more that I could ensure my own health and safety and make sure that I know what to do if someone is inappropriate with me. And so social interactions as they come are very abstract. And already some of our children have difficulty discriminating between, oh, this was an appropriate interaction, this was not. This person is nice and wants to be my friend. This person is not laughing with me, they're laughing at me. They are not a good friend. Already the social context is a bit confusing, right? So when we add sexual advances, sexual jokes, innuendos that they may not know, that social complexity increases even more. And so again, another reason why this topic is so important for us to begin initiating this topic. Identification of body parts, right? Perhaps again, that first step to this conversation is identifying body parts. And we'll talk right now about what might be the best way to talk to your son or daughter about their bodies, right? And you may use images, and we'll see some of those throughout the presentation. One thing is also, as we have these conversations with our children, and let me pause myself to say, I keep saying our children to, I like to associate with the crowd, right? But I like to share, I am not a parent myself. And the reason I like to point that out is I know that I don't know. I have a lovely 7-year-old beautiful niece who 7 going on 30, you know, she's got her whole personality and attitude already. But I know that my interaction with her is not as her mother. And so I will never sit here and say, oh, I understand, talk to your kids, it should be easy. I know that I don't know, right? My experience comes from the many families that I've had the blessing of interacting with in a therapeutic sense. And so I've learned from you all as families. But so I just wanted to throw that out there. I know that I don't know, and I speak to you if you're a parent. I know that there may be more things that are difficult in this topic. And so I just wanted to point that out there and put that out there. So in speaking to our children about sexuality, one might also consider that it's very important to use and teach them the common words of our body parts and the slang or the uncommon words of our body parts. It's important for them to know the medical and appropriate term, right? So vagina and penis and breasts, and to know, for them to know the actual terms of their body parts, all while perhaps also teaching them the less commonly used words, but the words that they may hear from their own peers, the slang that they will hear. And the reason for this, one, is if we just talk about our body parts with nicknames, some of our children are very literal in their understanding and may not fully understand what we're telling them. I often like to share this example, but I worked with a young boy, and the family was Latino, we speak Spanish. And so they would call the penis a pajarito. In Spanish, pajarito, in English means birdie, right? So for a while, we observed that the little kid was walking around with his hands crossed over his private area. And he was kind of walking hunched over and walking around hunched over. And after much exploration, the boy was nonverbal or limited communication. But we finally discovered the reason for that, right, was because we said the parents were calling his penis a pajarito, a birdie, which he knows birds fly away. So he lived in fear of his penis flying away because of the nickname that had been placed, right? And so for some, I find that that story always a bit humorous, right? But it's so true, right? If we give it nicknames, we sometimes may not be giving them the terms that they need to understand. Now, another sort of example or reason for using the slang or the uncommon words is their peer group may be using words that they are not familiar with, so they may not recognize when perhaps they are being talked about in a sexual manner, so almost like harassment. They may not even recognize the harassment if they don't know, oh, this is another word. Let's say, what are some other, feel free to type in the chat, educate me on all these other slangs. But for example, hooters instead of breasts. If a young woman doesn't know that a boy is referring to her breast because he says, oh, I like your hooters, I like your hooters, and doesn't know that that boy or person is making sexual advances at them because of the lack of knowledge of what that word means, we may have a bit of a problem, right? So one parent actually at one point shared that because her daughter knew the slang words, she was able to stop an interaction that could have gone further than she wanted. There was a boy who had approached her and said, hey, let me touch. I don't think they used the word hooters. It was a different word. I can't recall. But because she knew the word, she knew that he meant her breasts. And so she said, no, get away from me, right? Versus we've heard of other situations where because they didn't know, they may have said, okay, and they're almost waiting to see where is he going to touch because I'm not quite sure, right? And so this awareness of terminology and language can be of support to them for them to fully understand what peers are referring to. And again, overall, using opening communication, right? Using open communication for our sons and daughters to know I am a person that you can ask questions to, right? And for us to see ourselves as information givers, right? And to be able, of course, as we each influence our children, right, to influence them, what do you think is right or wrong? Me as a mom, I can share with you what I think or what our family believes is appropriate or not appropriate, knowing that at the end of the day, it will be our sons or daughters' choices how they carry their body. However, you get the opportunity to have those conversations if there is a culture of open communication, right? If there is not, then keeping in mind that they still are hearing information, but if they don't have a foundation for how to understand the information, they may just be filling in the gaps and not truly knowing what they're even hearing or understanding. So one, you might ask yourself, given what you know about your son or daughter and their learning style, what might be the best way for your son or daughter to learn about their own body? Will they benefit from using photos, videos, books? Will it help for them to not only look at a diagram, but then look at their own body? Right? And I make these extra points just in case this is relevant to anyone here. I know I worked with a lot of individuals who had a difficulty generalizing an image and understanding this image represents your own body. Their understanding was so literal that they would see an image, but whatever they learned about this diagram sometimes was not generalized to their own body. And so in that instance, parents had to talk about the diagram, but then go to their own body, their son's or daughter's own body, and demonstrate this diagram shows a breast. This one is yours, right? This is your bottom, right? This is your vagina. This is, so it depends on how you know your child understands and processes information. That should be taken into consideration as you discuss this topic that can kind of be abstract at times. You may want to decide or start deciding who will speak to them about this topic, right? About this topic. Where else will they get this kind of information from? Are there referrals that you have for them to look up more information in a way that is safe, right? Even now, more so. If you have the parental controls on your phone and all that, great. But keeping in mind that sometimes we can look something up and a whole list of images and things will come up that you were likely not looking for. I recently was looking up the name of a famous singer. It's a Spanish Mexican artist, and I looked up her name. And I guess her name is the same as one of a porn star. So when I looked up the singer's name, I said, well, this isn't mariachi music, right? Even just from the profile and the pictures that were coming up, I said, well, that's not it, right? So sometimes you'll find yourself with that. So also helping our children navigate what's a safe way to look up things, what controls can you put to make sure that you're going to information that you want and information that you may not want. So important points to bring up as we talk about talking to our children about this topic, finding appropriate and natural moments. If you have another son or daughter that is going through a puberty stage or their puberty stage, then you may want to use that as a natural opportunity to demonstrate. So your sister is 12. You're only 8 years old right now. What do you see different in your sister? Why do you think that happens? Right? What do you think she has to do to now take care of her body now that she has breasts, now that she has her period? What do you think she has to do? Because those natural moments can serve as what we call mental rehearsal. Right? Before I am in the situation, I am going to rehearse in my mind indirectly as I think about someone else who is going through this situation. And so sometimes when we can invite or create opportunity for mental rehearsal or almost this hypothetical role playing, right? This allows for our children to learn about the topic in a non-threatening way because they don't have to think about it for themselves yet. It's not happening yet. But now when it starts happening, they will have a safe context, right? Versus just this fear of, whoa, where is this hair coming from? Or, whoa, why am I bleeding, right? It wouldn't have been the first time that they hear or know or see what's going on, right? So using these natural moments, and again, considering involving other family members, some that may be going through that process, or other family members in general, trusted adults, right? If for your own reasons, maybe this topic is even a triggering one for you, and you say, boy, I don't know that I'm the best messenger for this topic and to create awareness for my son about this topic, let me elicit my brother's help, my sister's help, right? They're a trusted adult. They're going to have this conversation with me there, and I can help facilitate, but they're going to give the message, right? That may be possible with some planning. Using appropriate and individualized visuals, as we discussed, you know your son or daughter best. If you're a professional, you know the person that you're working with best. And so you may know what's going to work and what's not going to work. Using appropriate resources based on their age, right? Again, if they are younger, there may be a bit of a discretion of, I don't think they need to know all of this yet, but maybe we'll teach them this. Although I do want to make a point here that in general, not sure if you would agree, but in general, it seems children are learning about sex and sexual activity and even sexual jokes and things like that at a much younger age than we did. Right. I know that even for myself, this is side point, but I often have a conference with young girls during Valentine's Day. And we talk about relationships and all that. This is aside from me being an advocate. This is on the side. And what I was surprised with was I separated the girls into age groups, and I was ready to get some intense questions from the teenagers, from the older, 15 to 18-year-old bracket of girls. And to my surprise, the more descriptive questions came from the younger group, which was actually from 9 to 11. And so I know that was an eye opener for me of, boy, I had no idea about this terminology or these things when I was 9 years old or 11. And now these girls have questions about it, questions that indicate they've pretty much know a lot about this, right? So a point here to also try to gauge what really is the knowledge base of my son or daughter, right? Because I may be teaching at a level that they actually have surpassed and I just didn't know, right? And so to explore that a bit. And I was shocked too. I saw an emoji come up. I was shocked too. So I was going to move on, but I can't. And another point too, I can only imagine how difficult it is to keep a non-biased face. I know that I wasn't their mother, but when those questions came up, I wanted to run and scream, and I had to keep it in because I wanted to remain an open person that they can trust. And I wasn't going to say, why do you know that? Right? I needed to remain neutral, and that was hard. And I'm not their mother, right? And so I could only imagine how difficult that may be for some of us. Okay, so now in talking about sex and sexuality, it's also important to review concepts related to this, including gender identity, attraction, and orientation, right? And this is to make them aware of their own bodies, of getting them to think about their identity, their attraction, their orientation. And I'll just point this out. I know that currently for children, I used to be a therapist in mental health, and we didn't do this back when I was a therapist, but now I know that therapists ask children, even as young as 5 years old, do you identify as a boy? Do you identify as a girl? And so they're getting questions from outside sources. And so what better than to give them information to understand themselves and to understand the context of these questions when they are asked, right? And I want to point out, when we talk about sex and sexuality, when we talk about gender identity, attraction, orientation, I'm aware that I think even in this small group of 14 of us, there may be ranging opinions and concepts and perspectives about all of this, right? And so this conversation is open to all of those perspectives, and independently of what your perspective is, the message here is it's important for our kids to know, our children, our teens, adults to know. And when there is a disability, it may be even more important to make sure that we are describing things in a way that is congruent with how they process information, right? And so regardless of what each of our families believe and think about all of these topics, it's important to give our children information as a menu, if you would. And then, sure, your own family is going to share with your son or daughter what your family believes, thinks is appropriate, et cetera, about how to experience your sexuality, how to manage your sexuality. And the point here is they may need information, right? And along, of course, with your own conversation that includes your perspective as their parent, right? But the point here is there's information that is being shared by outside sources. Why not have a conversation so that when they hear these questions or terms, they know where to place this topic, right? So again, questions for you as the messenger, as the parent or professional is, what are your opinions about sexual expression? Right? What questions do you think your son or daughter has? And what questions do you not feel ready to answer? Knowing these things may help you better prepare for a conversation with your son or daughter. Self-awareness for you may be really important before you create awareness in your son or daughter, right? When I was in my background's in social work, and in social work, we talk a lot about professional values and personal values. And as therapists, you know, we are supposed to be a unbiased, neutral source. And so one of my professors, I remember, whenever we were talking about a topic, she would use the term, "Ooh, you leaked." She would point and say, "You leaked. I now know how you feel about this topic because of the gesture you made or the word that you used to say it. I now know what you think about this topic." And so it's often with this topic on sexuality important that we're aware of our own biases so that when we communicate this topic, we don't quote unquote leak. That when I'm talking to my son or daughter about the options of sexual expression, the options for how to explore their bodies, or the strategies for remaining abstinent, etc., that I'm able to be as unbiased as I could during that conversation. So part of this conversation about sex and sexuality includes reviewing social rules and expectations, physical and social boundaries. Keeping in mind that us discussing social rules for each social circle really is for awareness, of course, and two, in essence, it is to build their confidence and protect their self-esteem. The reason I say this is if they are not sure of what boundaries and rules should be respected in each social circle, then they run into the possibility of doing something that is outside of the norm. And then unfortunately, that opens them up to criticism, to bullying, right? And so us teaching them social rules and expectations really is for education and for their social self-esteem, that they know how to interact with several groups, right? And so teaching social rules and expectations is important so that they know what is appropriate interaction in a reciprocal manner. What is okay for family members to do to me, and what is okay for me to do to family members. Some family members may be accustomed to kisses on the cheek. Some may have lip-to-lip contact, and that may be the norm, right? So teaching these and helping them discriminate with family, this is okay, but of course, with friends, this is not, with strangers, this is not, et cetera, et cetera. Even this topic of stranger is a difficult one. I think on a regular basis, what is the rule? You don't talk to strangers. But I think if we really dig into that statement more and more, I think there's some consensus on the fact that it's not really accurate to say we don't talk to strangers, because we do. We talk to policemen who we've never met before. They're a stranger. We're in line and we say, oh gosh, a hot day, right? Oh my gosh. Oh, I like your shirt. Mom, you talked to a stranger. I thought you said no talking to strangers. Some of our children are very literal in their understanding. And so really talking about social circles and social rules really requires some more in-depth conversation to be able to capture all that needs to be captured. Okay, and here at the bottom, I placed a link that goes more into this concept of social circles and social rules. And this can be something beneficial for you to look into a little bit more as you help your son or daughter navigate the social world, which again, can be a bit confusing sometimes. So it is helpful to do this. It is just a little point here to add that it's really important, and I may be preaching to the choir, I realize, but just in case this helps, sometimes when our children are younger, there is certain behavior that may seem acceptable, right? Touching someone's hair, coming close to their bosom and hugging them, perhaps touching someone's bottom, perhaps a range of things that children may do that may even be endearing, right? We may even say, oh, how cute. Oh, that's okay. No worries. He likes my hair. He likes smelling my hair. Don't worry about it. And that's so great, right? If we have really understanding friends around us and all that. But a point of caution here is that sometimes there's certain behaviors, routines, mannerisms that may be difficult to break. If for a period of time they appeared acceptable, then it's really hard to make that shift and say, oh, well, you can't do that anymore. It is unacceptable, right? Why is no one looking at me endearing anymore when I'm coming up to them and wanting to hug them really close to their chest? I used to do that when I was 5, right? And they would say, oh, how cute. Oh, come here, honey, give me a hug. And now they're 12 and they're getting a different response, right? And so sometimes these interactions, these mannerisms, greetings that may be appropriate at a young age, we may want to be cautious of if it's going to be difficult to switch it off at a later age in 2 or 3 years. Perhaps we teach these boundaries even at a young age so that we don't create a behavior that's going to be really hard to shift and a perspective that will be hard to shift when they're older, right? So something to consider there. So when we talk about intimate relationships, and actually I'm gonna just make a brief pause here. And as we continue, I just want to check in and see if there's any thoughts, any comments, any questions up to this point. So if we could maybe pause the recording just for a sec. And I want to just do a quick check-in. Any questions, any thoughts? So we'll continue. So when we talk about sex and sexuality, we're also then talking about intimacy and relationship. And I'd like to point here that the difference between, there may be intimacy that is social, that is not sexual. And sometimes our sons or daughters, especially as they grow up, may be seeking social intimacy while we are afraid that they want sexual intimacy. That may also be true, right? Let's not be fooled. But they also may just be seeking that social intimacy. And when we're able to separate the two, then perhaps we can support them in seeking the social intimacy that they may be looking for. So intimate relationships provide opportunities to explore and build connection in these areas: physical, social, and emotional, and maybe others. Right. And so sometimes we may have a person. I worked with a gentleman. He was 17 at the time, and we were in a session with him and his mom, and he kept for a few weeks kept saying, you know, I want a girlfriend. I want a girlfriend. I want a girlfriend, Miss Sophie. I want a girlfriend. And the mom would kind of look at me like, make it go away, right? Make it go away. I don't want him thinking about that. We're not ready for that. And so I dared to ask, I said, you know, let's say his name was John. I said, John, I said, what would it look like to have a girlfriend? And when I asked that, he almost looked at me and he's like, well, we would go to the movies every Friday and share popcorn. Almost like saying, duh, right? That's what you do with a girlfriend. And so when the mom heard that, it really kind of switched up the perspective of him wanting a girlfriend, right? And so I say this because sometimes when we think about sex and sexuality and intimacy, when we think intimacy, we may go to the sexual part of it, all while some of our sons and daughters may be looking more for the social, emotional component of that. There is a person who for many years worked on sex and sexuality with individuals with disabilities. And pardon me, I never could get his last name right. I think it comes out later in the presentation, so I won't butcher it, but his first name is Dave. And in one of his conversations, he said, you know, when I get hired, he was a therapist that would get hired to discuss this topic of sexuality, goes, when I sit with these individuals to talk about sex and sexuality, I'm not getting sex questions. I'm actually getting relationship questions. The questions they're asking is, how do I know if someone likes me? How do I flirt? When is it appropriate to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend? When is it appropriate to get married? What do I do if someone doesn't want to get married and I do? All questions that were related more to the social, emotional intimacy of a relationship, even before the sexual part. Not to say that the sexual component isn't or won't be there, but sometimes the first point of conversation for many individuals that are in their teenage and adult years is this social intimacy that they're yearning for, that they're really looking for. And so we may be shying away from those really important conversations because we're associating a sexual aspect to it, when right now in their current phase, they may have social and emotional questions about it. That being said, there is a sexual nature, obviously, to this conversation, sex and sexuality. So when we are looking for options for exploring and spending sexual energy, and we use these sort of more generic terms because we describe sex as an energy that is felt, that is experienced, and that is released. It is spent, right? And so the different ways of spending sexual energy may be sex itself, so intercourse. It may be masturbation. It may be visual images or videos, so accessing or having access to some sort of pornography in images or in videos, and or sex surrogates, which I believe is not as common, or I don't hear this mentioned too much in California. In other states, and I won't mention it, I don't recall the specific state, but the concept of a sex surrogate is a person who provides support to another individual who requires physical support to be able to engage either in sex or in masturbation. And so this topic itself may be one of varying opinions, and that's okay. But for us to know the options of sex and sexuality, of releasing this energy, again, sex itself, masturbation, visual images, even perhaps the support of a sex surrogate. Now, there are other options. If we take away disability from this, right? If we look at our society in general, there is a range of individuals that have a range of beliefs and comfort levels with how to express their sexuality. There are some who would practice and are in line with practicing these first four that we've talked about: having sex, masturbation, visual images. In fact, I worked with a family who every year, the father, the dad, and the gentleman, he was 23 at the time, I believe. And every year it was tradition for father and son to go to Vegas, and they went to strip clubs. And this was a known tradition for them, right? As I say this, different of us will have different reactions to that. What? That is not appropriate. Or, I think that's kind of cool, right? We may be on, there's a full spectrum, right, of opinions of that. But again, purpose of this presentation is presenting the options. So in that sense too, then there are perhaps on an opposite side of that spectrum, those that may encourage abstinence in their family, that may be the concept and the belief of that family, right? Abstinence, whether that means abstinence as celibacy throughout someone's life or abstinence before marriage, right? And if that is the case, regardless of disability or not, then we have to think there are those that have sexual energy that choose abstinence or choose not to engage in the first four bullet points that we've discussed. If that is the case, it doesn't mean if I believe in abstinence, we're not going to talk about the topic at all. Because in abstinence, there is still, I would say, right, a component of presenting alternatives. Abstinence, or making the choice for abstinence, doesn't mean the sexual energy goes away and we can ignore it, right? Even with an abstinence, that person will then need to know, what do I do? How do I manage the feeling and choose abstinence if that is their choice? So some strategies may include exercise, right? We sometimes have jokingly maybe heard, oh, walk it off or go take a cold shower, right? They are referring, we've said it as jokes, but they are referring to an alternative method of releasing their sexual energy, of distracting their thought to be able to distract their energy, right? And or waste energy. Because in fact, if sexual energy is energy, let's spend it, right? So exercise may be one. Another may be communication, actually being able to express. And let me dig into this concept a little bit more. It may seem unrelated, but what I'd like to share in this is the concept of managing someone's sexuality, their own sexuality, may be easier. The frustration that they may feel in managing their own sexuality may become lighter and may be easier when, one, they feel they have more control and independence over their life, just in general. Just like the woman that I talked about at the beginning, she was getting frustrated. Yes, she was having some sexual feelings that she didn't know how to express. And also, she had frustration that everyone was making choices for her, what she wore, how her hair looked, the fact of how her decor was. Those two together were an increased level of frustration and anxiety. If we can relieve one of those, which is how can we give more control to the person over their life, How can we give them more opportunities for independence, regardless of how much need they have? Perhaps not that the sexual feelings go away, but perhaps frustration in that area may be a little bit less when they feel control and pleasure in other areas of their life. Again, I'd like to stay in this realm of disability or not. We have a range of adults in a range of partnerships. There are people who are single, some by incident because of whatever happened to the relationship or by choice. There are those that live domestically with someone but not married. There are those that are in open relationships. So there is a gamut, there is a range of relationship arrangements, right? And so what I'm saying with this is for our individuals, right, for our sons or daughters that have a disability, we must also open up communication with them for them to know the range of possibilities in relationships, the range of sexual encounters, giving them this opportunity to explore all these options, and then support to choose for themselves what kind of partnership do I want to have? What kind of sexual activity do I want to engage in? Considering that I could either be this, or this as a sexual partner to someone, maybe I do think that I want to have sex within marriage. Maybe I do think that I would have sex with someone only after they are my committed partner as a boyfriend or girlfriend. Maybe I have a 10-date rule, right? Isn't that a thing in TV shows? I have a 10-date rule, no sex until after 10 dates, or no sex after 3 dates. There is a range of possibilities, right? Every person practices whatever they feel they're comfortable with. And what I'm saying is for our sons and daughters, presenting this as information and as options is sometimes what is important. So providing more control over their life of making these decisions for themselves versus having these decisions imposed on them, that itself can be the key to lessen the frustration, including their sexual frustration. It's different when someone is told, nope, can't do that, versus these are your options. I think I want to choose not to do that, or I want to choose to do this, right? There is a difference when there is a level of control and independence. And here I am mostly talking about when we reach adulthood. And even in these teenage years, right, our relationship with our parents, I would venture to say, is often dependent. If we are close in our later years, usually a common denominator will be that during our teenage years, we felt that they respected our autonomy. Even if we were under their roof and rules were dictated by them, if we sort of felt a sense of autonomy with our parents, usually that leads to adults wanting to still be connected to their parents. Versus if in childhood and adolescence, the person feels restrained and that they're not respected in their independence and autonomy, what we often see at 18, disability aside, at 18, these children want to run, right? I don't want to talk to my mom. I can't wait to get out of this house, right? And so same thing with the dynamic of a relationship with a person with a disability or not. And again, in this sense, now we're saying with a disability. The more freedom that a person experiences and the more independence that a person is given, perhaps the likelier that when that person turns into an adult, the more that they will still want to be connected to their parent. Same goes for their sexual independence and their sexual freedom. Doesn't mean that we don't get to chime in and tell them, hey, this is what I think is good, and this is what I did in my own life, or hey, I did this and it didn't work for me. Maybe you don't want to do that. Doesn't mean you don't get to be that parent and pass on your perspective and beliefs, but it does mean giving them still that freedom of choice and information for them to feel that they're the ones making the choice is important. So communication, support during this phase of navigating information, very important. Briefly, I just want to reference this concept of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And the reason I bring this up is very often it seems that with individuals with disabilities, perhaps you agree, that with individuals with disabilities, we sometimes just care about their physiological and safety needs. If their health and safety is secured, then we think that's good, right? If you're familiar with it, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a concept that a person has different levels of needs, and that the foundational one indeed is physiological needs, which include breathing, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, and in this theory, it actually includes sex and reproduction. The next level to the hierarchy of needs, according to Maslow, is safety, right? The need for personal security, for having employment, resources, health, property. And I'd like to sort of go to the top levels: love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. And again, the reason why I bring this up in this context is because sometimes as parents, perhaps, even as a system, right, in special education, perhaps in regional center, the system, the way that it's framed for individuals with disabilities, if the first two levels are being met, it almost feels like we're good to go. Not recognizing sometimes that the first two levels only let us survive. They're about survival, but they're not really about thriving. And when we talk about an adult or a teenager with a disability, our hope, right, and our agenda is for them to thrive in their life, for them to have the options, for them to have the life just like any other typically developing adult. And so I just bring this concept up to help us think about, is my son or daughter really reaching those levels of love and belonging, right? Am I to support them a little bit more in making these connections? Should I have these conversations about sex and sexuality so that I can make sure that they know how to navigate love and relationships and belonging, for them to have a better self-esteem because they're able to make these choices for themselves, to them to feel more self-actualized, et cetera, et cetera. So I just point this out as a side point of the importance of helping our teenagers and adults to feel that they are living a life that is independent and that is of a life that will allow them to thrive, not just to stay in this bottom level of surviving. So when we talk about using social connection, right, as a way of even releasing this sexual energy, we talk about connection, we talk about helping our sons and daughters to experience and develop new hobbies, right, to identify their emotions and how they feel about not having a boyfriend, a girlfriend, about not knowing how they feel about sex and sexuality. Having these conversations and identifying emotions itself can be something that helps them. It also may be important here to discuss, so important for us to help them identify their strengths. We know that in terms of adults with disabilities, they do have less access to social interaction, to romantic relationships, and to sexual experiences. That is something that is reported, that it's known. So if a person is having to do without some of these things, right, then helping them increase other areas of their life that will support them in feeling balance between what they have and what they don't have, what they do and what they don't do, including having sexual intercourse, right? So what my point with this is, even in our typically developing population, right, there is a range, we talked about it earlier, of those that are single, those that are in partnership, those that are married, those that are divorced, etc. Every person, one could say, feels certain voids in their life in different ways. A married person, right, may say, man, I miss going out with my friends at whatever time I wanted, and oh, I miss that. All while the single person may say, man, I'm tired of my friends. I wish that I had a partner that I could go home to every night, and I just wish that was it. So for all people, right, there are gaps in what we may want and what we may not want, in what we have and what we don't have. So with this, what I'm saying is, if indeed individuals with disabilities have a lesser chance sometimes of these social sexual relationships, what else can we do to build the quality of their life as they navigate this space of sex and sexuality and relationship? What strengths, other strengths can we build? What other experiences can we present and offer so that the person feels fulfilled, even if they're not being fulfilled in the ways that they wish to in a later future, involving having intercourse and a partner to have intercourse with? So how can we provide strengths and new experiences to sort of balance out their experience, right? This same young lady that I spoke about in the beginning, we knew that every holiday season, October, November, December, were very difficult months for her. She actually lived in homes since she was the age of 8. This is a very sad case in which, when she became diagnosed, the family placed her somewhere, and she never really again had family contact. And this person, this individual, although very had limited communication, she communicated through typing. And so every holiday season, come September, we would see a rise in her frustration and aggression, even self-injurious behavior. And so with communication, she was able to say, I'm very sad that I don't have a family, and I'm reminded of that during the holidays. That was a fact that we were not able to resolve for her. Unfortunately, that was the case for her. But what we could do was fill her life, help her fill her life with so much more, that then this thing that causes some pain and discomfort for her emotionally could hopefully take a lesser space in her emotions than all this other thing that she's experiencing. So we already knew, come the holiday season, we supported her in sending emails to friends and peers that she had. She loved baking, so we upped the baking during the season. She actually would sell them during the holiday season. She loved art, so we did art classes, especially during that season that was difficult for her. So it was a way. Could we resolve the family dynamics? We cannot. But what we could do was help her fill her life with other things. Again, the reason I say that again is, if indeed sex is something that the person chooses not to practice at this time, or has difficulty practicing because of mobility, because of certain capacities, then help them navigate what they want to do with that. But also, how can we fill their life with so much more, so that this sexual frustration that does exist could be lesser, could take less space than all the good in their life. So how can I help my son or daughter build social connection? What can they do to feel less alone? And with this, I sort of jump to this concept of, does the person need more services? Do they need to be part of a social skills group? Do they need to be in a community group where they're able to go out with friends in a structured way so that it helps them how to socialize, right? How do we fill them with more social experiences? Okay, so this is the person that I was discussing, Dave Hingsberger. Pardon me if I'm not saying that right, but Dave is a person who was saying, when I get together with these individuals, they don't have sex questions. They mainly have relationship questions. What they often would ask was, how can I get a girlfriend? How do I know if they like me? How do I know if they are taking advantage of me? Where can I meet compatible partners? Good question. What is a good age to enter a relationship? So many of them have these type of questions versus the ones that you and I may fear. right? And so this may be more of a topic of conversation. Going into this conversation about having relationships, I would just like to point this out and put this out there as a resource. When we talk about having a boyfriend, girlfriend, entering social intimate relationships, as parents, you may fear what the outcome of that is. I know I had several moms who would tell me, Sophie, I don't want him to date because the day that they break up, oh my gosh, my son is going to go into a deep depression and I'm not going to know what to do. Can we just not touch that, right? Or for whatever reason, right? There's a fear of, man, is my son or daughter going to experience rejection? How are they going to handle that? So one sort of possibility out there to explore is the importance of teaching our sons and daughters the range of possibilities that exist when one enters a social relationship and or a romantic relationship. So let me give this example, stepping out of the topic of relationships, and then we'll come back to relationships. So I worked with a gentleman who unfortunately had an incident at school, which was considered a crime. And so this individual had a court date, and he did something that was definitely illegal, and he was going to be in front of a judge, and there was going to be a sentencing. Now, this individual, he was very anxious about this, as any of us probably would, right? And so he had a sort of echolalia and would repeatedly say, let's say his name was Roger in an orange suit, Roger in an orange suit, Roger in an orange suit. And what he meant by that, as you may guess, was that his image was going to, they're going to put me in jail, I'm going to prison, and they are going to, I'm going to be wearing an orange suit like I see on TV, right? I'm going to go to jail, I'm going to prison, and I'm going to be wearing an orange suit, and it's going to be scary. Now, what was difficult is his parent, myself, I could not tell him that is not going to happen. I couldn't say, oh, it's going to be fine, don't worry about it. Who could say that? I didn't know. Mom was concerned that indeed he would go to jail, right? So the thing here was we couldn't say, don't worry about it. No, that is definitely an outcome possibility. That is a possibility of something that can happen. What we chose to do in that situation to help him manage this anxiety was help him expand the outcome possibilities in order to make his mind a little more flexible about what the outcomes could be. So for him, it required us having several sessions where we said, Roger, indeed, the judge saying you're going to jail and you having to wear a prison uniform, that is one possibility. But can I tell you, that is the worst case scenario. That is a number 5 scale if we had a 1 through 5 scale. So let me ask you, what other things do you think can happen? And he himself, I believe he communicated or typed, he himself said, pay money. The judge could tell me you have to pay a really big fine. And I said, well, that's actually a really good one. I said, okay, so let's put that as number 4. That is maybe the second worst possible scenario. I said, what else? And he said, oh, maybe like, I channel him. I still remember. He's like, maybe he actually knew what inpatient was. He goes, maybe an inpatient program. I have to go to some kind of program. It's not jail, but I have to be there every day for like 6 months. And I said, good one. Okay, so that's going to be a number 3. What about number 2? He said volunteering. So doing volunteer work in the community to make up for it. And then for number 1, I believe the lesser thing he said was to pay a smaller fine and do a few hours of community service. It was a combination of both. All this to say, he only had an image of the worst case scenario, and literally creating this scale, we got to the point where I would just have to take it out and tell him. He would say, Roger in an orange suit, and I would say, or what's number 4? What's number 3? What's number 2? What's number 1? We don't know. So let's remain flexible in our mind of what the outcome possibilities are. This lengthy example to say the following. When we enter relationships, those are high stakes sometimes, right? So one can support our son or daughter in creating a personalized range of possibilities. So, hey, you want to ask someone out. I don't want to. They're going to say, no, you're dumb. You're weird. No. And they may start freaking out about that, right? So we may say, you know what? That could happen, because indeed, you cannot tell them that won't happen. We have a range of people from kindness to very mean, right? So someone could be very mean to your son or daughter as they try to engage in a romantic relationship. So number 5 could be, they may be mean to you and they may say, ew, no, I don't want to go out with you. That's true. How would you feel if that happened? And work through that whole scenario, right? And then introduce, what else could happen though, right? What would be a number 4 kind of response? What would be a number 3 kind of response? What would be a number 2? What would be a number 1, which the best case scenario in this case, right, would be, oh my God, I like you too. Let's go on a date. I love you, right? We wish it was that easy, right? So we can work through that and then help them. So remember, as you approach a person, we don't know what's going to happen. Number 5 could happen, number 3 could happen, but we already have a plan for how are we going to manage each of these outcomes if they happen. What's our response plan for each of these things that could or could not occur? So expanding the range of outcomes for them to not think of just worst case scenarios. It helps to redirect their negative thinking about social interactions, maybe even your own, right? If you've got some anxiety about your son entering a relationship, reduce anxiety, increase flexible thinking, and address different responses and plans based on each outcome of possibility. So this can be important. As we navigate this scale, it might be important for us to help our sons or daughters prepare in their mind and think, what are you looking for in a relationship? What are your expectations for marriage? Are you dating to marry, or are you dating to kind of explore different partners? And what is your goal in dating? What personal boundaries would you like to practice? Again, you can give them a range of their possibilities and they get to choose what boundaries, such as, or just personal boundaries, right? That can include kissing, sex, and I think I get into that a little bit later. So part of those personal boundaries, what are their date etiquette concepts and expectations? Small things like, what do you want to wear? I say small things, but maybe some ladies in the room can agree with me that knowing what to wear for a date is not always the simplest thing. Yes, right? What am I going to wear? I don't want to go too casual, too dressed up. So helping them navigate these little details that sometimes feel like a greater mountain, right? So what do I want to wear? Who's going to pay the bill? How do I feel about that? How do I feel about half and half? How do I feel about him paying, him not paying, me paying the full bill? How do you feel about that? Because indeed, those are the nuances that sometimes we all go through, but if we don't talk about, that may make the date a little harder for the other person. Who will drive? Do you think it's a good idea for them to pick you up on a first date, considering that they would know your address then? Do you want them to know where you live? Do you want to meet at a coffee shop and they can pick you up from there? Can you, right? Sorting out all these details. Do you want to have sex on the first date or not? Do you want to kiss on the first date? How do you feel about holding hands on the first date? All of these questions that can prepare them for encounters. Okay. Birth control options. If indeed being that sex is a one of those options for releasing sexual energy, if sex is the option, do we need to talk about birth control options and explore those and inform them about those? If sexual activity is occurring, and even if not, things like pap smears, do they know about exams that are important for their sexual health? Pap smears, prostate tests, HIV exams, what will help them know and manage their sexual health better? Do you want to mentally rehearse dating conflicts that could occur, right? There could be love triangles. There could be, you can get in a relationship and then one person kind of starts feeling more feelings than the other. What do you think would happen there? This is options, thoughts for you to address, using your own discretion. Your son, your daughter, and you'll get to know them more in this area after having these conversations, so you can decide what might be appropriate and what not. In the group with friends, in other support groups, you may want to ask each other what has worked so far in conversing with your children. How do you know if your son or daughter has questions about sex or relationships? What happened in your scenario may help another parent to say, oh, my son does that too. Oh, that might mean that he does have questions, right? Etc. What behaviors do you see that could indicate that they are experiencing sexual tension or frustration? And might sexual expression, behaviors, and interests display differently in men versus women? Maybe you have all daughters and the individual with a disability is your son, and you are expecting that they display their sexual interests in the same way that you saw your daughters do it, or vice versa, right? So considering how might things look different. Okay, so bringing us to the end of this presentation, you have a few links here for you to explore that can further support you in talking about this topic, presenting books, images. If you do a quick search, books about physical developmental for children, or books about puberty, even if you just put those related terms in there, that can help you search for some materials. So all in all, our message in this presentation, sex and sexuality is such an important topic for the social aspect and for the health and safety aspect. And so we encourage, regardless of the personal beliefs, personal choices that you each may have in your family, it is indeed important to discuss this topic with our children, teens, and adults, to make them aware of what is happening in their body, how they can manage the sensations in their body, what their options for that are, and how other people should be viewing and treating their body, and then exploring this area of social intimacy and romantic relationships with or without the sexual intercourse component. So I hope this conversation has helped. We leave you with resources. And that being said, I kick it over and I'm open to questions or any further discussion that we may want to have.